to advise these people. And I said, okay, there is a crime here. There is a human rights violation. I know about constitutional law, and I know something about criminal law. So I called these all lawyers, a criminal lawyer, Gonzalo Miob, another lawyer specialized in human rights and everything. I said, okay, we're going to help this guy. But after that, we realized that nobody was helping legally these people. I mean, the human rights organizations actually do reports about what we're doing, but nobody was actually assisting these people legally. So that was the first case. Then the second case came. Then the third case. Then we represented 8 of these people that were killed. Then a lot of people that were injured. Then we started representing people that were in prison. Then we started representing, and now Foro Penal has represented more than 5,000 cases of human rights abuses, specifically arbitrary detentions and torture. And just last year, we represented more than 2,500 cases of arbitrary detentions. Of the 3,700 cases are being registered by Foro Penal, by my organization, as people that were detained because of political motives.
Thank you. How about you, Alexandra? How did you get into this line of work?
For me, it's always important values. And when I was a school child, I take part in competition, and it was research. What is most important for people in general? And I choose the human rights as a topic of my research and win this contest. And then I decided to be a lawyer to protect human rights. I graduated law faculties. And after that, together with my colleague, we created a human rights organization, but much more efficient for Ukraine and for our people. My work started after Euromaidan, because before Euromaidan, we analyzed the persecution for political motives of civil society in Ukraine, and we try to stop the repressive law in our parliament, but we understand that we even couldn't make this inertia to authoritarianism slowly, not even stop at all. And when the peaceful demonstration was cracked down, the next morning, together with my colleague, we create a civil initiative, Euromaidan SOS, because we work in Russia, we work in Belarus, and we understand that it's very important to create something which can help injured people and provide them pro bono legal aid. And frankly speaking, when we establish this initiative, we think that we will help only injured students and arrested people during this night on Euromaidan event. And we never even imagine then that through these months, through our hands, we'll pass on hundreds and hundreds injured people, beaten, tortured, people accused in administrative and criminal charges, and then relatives of missing and killed people. And now our initiative, Euromaidan SOS, which includes several thousands of volunteers. Mostly of these volunteers have no civil experience at all, experience of civil participation, but couldn't be indifferent in this dramatic period of Ukraine. We try to monitor and to assist to people who live in occupied territories, I mean Crimea, because they suffered from political persecution. And also we try to monitor and document human rights abuses and war crimes and help victims of them in territory of war, which are in the east of Ukraine.
Thank you, Alexandra. So, Joseph, about yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you for Freedom House for inviting me to be on this panel. It's just to say a few words on how I did get to the human rights field. I grew up in one of the most impoverished parts of Addis Ababa, so I looked at people from early on that a lot of their problems, apart from the economic suffering, a lot of their issues have come from the practice of poor governance in terms of how to get services, very basic services, but that would actually change how they live their lives. So starting from high school, assisting neighbors and family friends, just writing a one-page petition to a local official so that they could address their housing issues, their food ration issues, etc. So that it was not even a choice for me to look the other way when I got out of law school. So I, against the advice of so many friends and some family members, that getting into this dangerous line of work would have consequences for life, or if that goes even beyond myself. So I joined the Ethiopian Human Rights Council. We did, it has become like challenging government actions, exposing abuses in the farthest rural areas of the country have become a daily thing for us in terms of, particularly when we look at the response it generates from government, either by way of arresting our investigators, shutting down offices, raiding offices. It has become, the challenge has been going up and then until it becomes really, really dangerous for the survival of myself and our colleagues. So for me, how I did get into it, it was not that much of a choice. So I got in by necessity.
Sounds like it was your conscience who was speaking. Alexander, let's go back to you and Ukraine. I'm very curious to know if being a woman makes it better or harder to be a human rights activist, or does it even make a difference?
Of course, there is a problem with different issue of discrimination in my country, and there is a violation of women's rights at all. It's general for post-Soviet countries where human rights level protection of human rights are not enough. But still, I don't see any difficulties to be a woman human rights defenders in Ukraine. The main threats which all human rights defenders in Ukraine are cured, it's connected with another issues. It's general threats because we couldn't physically enter to some territories, or even we enter, there is a threat of kidnapping and killed. I mean, occupied part of Donbas, threats to be arrested. For example, in annexed Crimea, and it's general threats not only for women but for men also.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the United States played any type of a role in sparking the Euromaidan movement? And the follow-on to that is, are there other areas where the United States could play a greater role right now in the human rights democratic movement in the Ukraine? So a two-part question.
I understand. Of course, the responsibility for democratization of Ukraine rely upon Ukrainian citizens themselves. And Ukrainian citizens prove that we understand this responsibility during our struggle for Euromaidan events. And now, when we try to assert our democratic choice in the weapon conflict with Russian Federation. And I must admit that in this struggling for democratic values, we need allies. And if we saw that authoritarian regime cooperate with each other and help each other, we think that democratic countries also have to support the democratic values, devotion to them they declare. And for Ukraine, United States of America is a symbol of maybe romantic symbol of modernization. And for us, it's very important that in this dramatic period of time, democratic countries and United States of America support our struggle. In other cases, it will lead to great disappointment in population, in democratic values at all. And also, it can be a very big and huge results on disappointment in post-Soviet Union at all, because a lot of countries of so-called post-Soviet Union now look in situation in Ukraine and as a test how the democracy can be spread during this region. So we always said that now in Ukraine is resulted not only the destiny of our country, but the destiny of our region.
But can you be more specific about the type of support from the United States that you're talking about? Is it financial support? Is it symbolic support? Is it emotional support?
It's different levels of support, and I will start with symbolic level because we need positive messages and we need assistance in diplomacy and to show the real pictures of what's going on in Ukraine. Russian Federation use a lot of instruments on diplomatical levels, and it's very hard to compete with Russian propaganda. Very often is said that truth is the weapons of weak, and because the only what weak side has is the truth. But I think that it's the main instrument which devoted our future. And second level, of course, is supporting on financial and expertise levels, because we fight on two fronts. I mean, front for our integrity and territory sovereignty, but also the front of reforms of law enforcement bodies, judiciary reforms, general prosecutor office, etc. And here we, as civil society, need expertise, need good practice, and need the push to our government under the side of international community to move them in the right way.
Thank you. Alfredo, you and your organization have just won the State Department's Human Rights Defender Award. Do you think this award has made your organization, and everybody, all of your volunteers, feel more empowered, or do you feel like this was just a token gesture of the U.S. government?
No, it's an award, so I mean, of course, we take it as a gesture, not just for our organization, but actually for human rights defenders in Venezuela. So actually, we got an award for the Canadian Embassy also, and it's not, I don't see it as a way to, of course, I mean, the volunteers of our organization are very happy when they get an award like that. So they feel in a country like, a small country that we believe that nobody's taking care of the situation that is happening there, to have an award from any country, and it's very important for them. So in some way, it's a kind of, I would say, to increase will of them in order to continue working.
Are there any tangible results of an award like that?
Tangible? Well, no, like tangible. I mean, I don't see it like that. I see it more like a moral issue. So it's a way of taking care of one organization in Venezuela. It's a kind of more a moral issue. A tangible result, I mean, it's not that we receive anything like money or something like that. It's more like a moral issue, and my organization and all the members are very happy about it. And it's like a recognition for your work whenever you're doing something voluntarily and free. I mean, because we don't receive any like money or something. So everyone like what we do is actually to use our part of our time as lawyers, or we provide time to people. I mean, to assist people of our regular work.
So what type of support have Western countries provided to your organization, if any?
No support. I think this. I mean, we don't receive like financial support or something like that for many reasons. I'm not against of it. It's because actually our country, our government is being sometimes they don't allow, even though it's not illegal. They start saying that in some way they try to create the impression that it's not allowed to receive money, and they start attacking you. And so we prefer not to receive any financial support, and that's how we've been working. But I will make an opinion about it. I think if you ask me why can, it's not a question, but I will answer it even though. If you ask me what kind of international support we need, and what is the problem? That whenever you see a problem, international problem, you just look one country. And the problem, for example, of human rights abuses in Venezuela, political prisoners. There are 78 political prisoners at this moment in Venezuela. More than 2,000 people are being persecuted, using the judicial system as a weapon for political persecution. But then you see China. And then you see one Jew, a lawyer, who is in jail. And actually yesterday, or today, I saw news that her son, one Jew, was a lawyer from China, actually a lawyer like me, that was taken to jail because she was assisting people that were human rights, because of human rights abuses. And you see one Jew, and you see Marcelo Croato, who is another guy who's in jail from my organization. He's under house arrest, but he was 1 year in jail. He attempted suicide twice. He's sick now because of the prison. And if you see Virtuca Mideksa in Ethiopia, she was in jail, she was a judge, and she was taken to jail because of a decision against the government. And then you see Maria Lourdes Afiun in Venezuela, a judge. She was taken to jail 3 years, raped, tortured, because she actually took a decision against the government. And she released one guy that was a politically inconvenient, what we call the political inconvenience, not to talk about political prisoners or prisoners of conscience. That is a difficult, complex explanation. If you see, I mean, I can start talking about different things. If you see, for example, my friend Mona Seif, from Egypt, and his brother is in jail, and she's communist, and her family is communist, and her brother is a political prisoner in Egypt. So what I'm trying to say is that whenever, there's no more battery here. So, okay. Whenever you talk about a human rights situation, a human rights abuse, you have to look at as an international thing. So the international support for human rights abuses is something that not just the United States, everyone has to look at it. It's not just a rhetorical thing. I mean, we are always talk about that human rights violations must be universal and the International Criminal Court and everything, but at the end, it's a rhetorical thing. So and then I want to be so hard maybe in this comment, and it is the question regarding about Iran and Cuba negotiations and any kind of negotiations. I mean, when politics and human rights in some way are not linked, and whenever whenever we linked politics and human rights is whenever we are really going to get a tangible support for any country in the world, including Venezuela.
So you just mentioned the negotiations in Cuba. I'd like to hear your opinion about whether the Cuba negotiations included any discussions on human rights issues. And if so, what has been the impact on Venezuela and other Latin American countries? And if not, what has been the impact?
There is a different, I understand that in politics, perception is very important in politics. Well, that's what I see. I'm not a politician, but that's how I see. I mean, you present that human rights are being taken care of by the negotiations. But then you go inside and you talk to Lía Villares, a friend of mine, who lives in Cuba, or Antonio Rodiles, who represent Danilo Maldonado, who is El Sexto, who is in jail for 9 months. And whenever the United States got into Cuba and negotiate and start negotiations and everything, nobody talks about Danilo, and he's in jail. And the answer specifically is, if in Cuba, from what I've heard, human rights organizations or defenders are being actually considered, I will say no. And actually there is a game that this kind of governments use. And this is the same game that the Chinese government use. And the same game that the Cuban government use. And it's the same game that Venezuelan government use. How this game works. Okay, there is a list of political prisoners here. So we release 2. Then we take to jail 100 more. Then we release 1. Then we take to jail 500. And so in the end, the number, that's why I hate numbers. I hate lists of political prisoners, even though we have it. But we hate the list because it's not the list of political prisoners that you say, okay, there are 53 people that are being released in Cuba. Are really released? Or they released 53 people when you went to Cuba in order to get the perception that people are being released, but then when you out of Cuba, then there are 100 more people in jail. So look in China. Okay, there were 234 lawyers taken to jail. 234, including one Jew. And now these people, some of them are still in prison. Some of them, there is a judicial process against them. Some of them are under house arrest. And even if you're under house arrest, then it's supposedly you're free. No, you're not free. I mean, sometimes it's worse to be under house arrest. No, not worse, but it's bad to be under house arrest. And I will say worse because I can tell you a lot of stories about how people, how the prisons are in Venezuela. But anyhow, but you're still in prison, so it doesn't mean you're being released. Or even if you have a judicial process that you have restrictions for leaving the country, or restrictions to talk to the media, or restrictions to participate in any assembly, then you're not free at all. So that is something. So who and we'll finish with this. Sorry, because you always tell me that I have to finish in 2 minutes. But so the thing is, and I remember Steve Pinker, this psychologist from Harvard, that he talked about the reduction of violence is because that the people, they know more about human rights. That actually the policemen take care about what is a human rights violation, so they know whatever, et cetera, et cetera. And so who know about the human rights situation in Cuba or Venezuela or Iran or Russia or China? Who know about it? The people who are there, sitting with the prisoners. And who are these people? What Steve Pinker called the courageous resistance, I think is the word. Well, what are these people? The people that are totally marginal. Who are them? The human rights defenders. So whenever you don't support human rights defenders in the world, you can't talk about human rights abuses or whatever. No, abuses, yes, but human rights protection.
Thank you for raising that human factor, which I think oftentimes we forget. And in the format of numbers, and when there's no news media, clearly it sort of gets away from our day-to-day living. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. So let's get to Ethiopia now. Joseph, I used to work with a very smart Ethiopian gentleman who was the Secretary General of the International Red Cross in Geneva. It was the first African that had ever held that position. And he himself actually had been in prison a couple of decades ago because of his political beliefs. He thought that Meles was actually doing a pretty good job for Ethiopia, and all of this insistence on human rights, democracy issues was going to hurt Ethiopia's economic development. And I want to know what you think about that.
I think, well, let me start just by saying that we cannot deny that the country has moved a long way in the last 25, 24 years in terms of lifting up people from poverty, in terms of building roads, in terms of building basic infrastructure.
I'm sorry, are you hearing him in the back? Yeah, so maybe you want to speak a bit louder. Very good, that's much better, thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of economic gains, in terms of numbers, in terms of statistical data that support this much talked about development, economic development, it could be admitted to an extent, but that is still debatable in terms of its actual value. But again, it's not just that. I mean, I think it has become very clear now. Any kind of economic development based just on this infrastructural assessment, just that is removed from a consideration of the human condition. Like that is said to have been gained in an environment, in a context where people have literally been restricted from speaking out on government excesses, on the very issues that concern them on a daily basis, in a situation where the media has been shut down virtually, in a situation where the ruling party continues to win elections after election with 100% margin. These are not a recipe for me to sustain the much talked about economic development. These are rather recipes for instability for me. So if you look at these numbers, again, there are still, a lot of it is still to be verified on the ground, but the foundation they are being built on is very questionable, in the sense that, in fact, it's a very dire situation for the rights of individuals in Ethiopia to have a say, even in this so-called development that they are being told it's benefiting them. So I would tend to disagree on that. These are not mutually exclusive. Meles could be good, was maybe good in the economic front, but under his regime, people have been suffering from exile, torture, and even the system institutionalized torture in the country. Like there have been facilities where dissidents are taken to undergo that kind of maltreatment. So economic development, well and good, but these are not, and ensuring the rights of people, they should not be mutually exclusive. They could go hand in hand. In fact, I think, like the guest speaker was saying, a more free society is likely to sustain whatever development they have been achieving. So yeah,
You've talked about the fact that Ethiopia receives about 30 to 40% of its budget through foreign aid from the major donor governments, the largest of which is the United States. Do you think these governments have leveraged this type of influence sufficiently to impact the democratics and human rights movement in Ethiopia? Or do you think the fact that Ethiopia is now playing a crucial role in safeguarding security and fighting against al-Shabaab in the Horn of Africa, and because of that, maybe some of the governments are sort of closing their eyes to the situation?
My assessment is that to start with the leverage issue, I do not believe that this leverage has been sufficiently used, or there is a will to do so on the part of the major donors.
Why is that? Why is there no will?
I will come to that. It takes me to the other point that there is an overemphasis on the security cooperation that these major world powers are having, that Ethiopia plays an irreplaceable role in stabilizing the Horn of Africa and fighting al-Shabaab. The other is that nobody wants to kind of rock the boat, that narrative that Ethiopia is on the right track. This country have been suffering from recurrent famine just 30, 40 years ago. That is not being the narrative now. It's about poverty eradication, it's about development, it's about infrastructure. So nobody would want to go into the nuance of that. There is no interest, particularly on the development industry, that there needs to be a success story somewhere to be told. So I think the case of Ethiopia has been one in this regard. But again,
So let me interrupt you just for a moment. So do you think the way the results of development is measured should democratic improvements and human rights improvement, should that become part of that measure?
Exactly, because like I was saying, it's just a half thing. It's not complete. Even the stability that we would aspire to achieve through lifting up people out of poverty is not really firm, in the sense that there have been resentments, there have been fault lines. It's a country of 90 million with more than 80 ethnic groups. So there have been multiple interests here and there that could actually threaten the very existence of the nation as a nation, let alone its just stability and going into a crisis. So I think this dynamics needs to be given a close attention. And the fact that there is this overemphasis on the security cooperation aspect of it, in the short term, it seems like it's working. Like Ethiopia has been doing a number of incursions into Somalia, fighting al-Shabaab, and managed to keep itself as a stable nation. But on the other hand, this overemphasis on the security aspect of it is building a kind of government that has its security machinery so rich and so tough that would be an obstacle to accountable governance, which the United States particularly attaches a lot of attention to. So it's become now just not affecting the government becoming authoritarian, but it's going to the extent of affecting these civil-military relations in the country, that the military is becoming so powerful, the security apparatus is feeling that they are so invincible to the point that they can derail or they can impair any kind of democratic processes, including not leaving even if they were defeated in an election, assuming that one happens in the country. So I don't think a lot of the donor community is aware of that dynamics, that the fact that there is an increasing tendency to beef up the military, the excesses of this security cooperation, giving this security apparatus like the sense of invincibility and eventually running the show. So that's the danger I think we are running into.
Okay, thank you. You know, I think we can start collecting questions from the audience now. We can pass around some cards and write some of our questions down. So let's get to some general questions now. Alexandra, you know, you talked quite a bit about the importance of U.S. support and obviously European support. You know, there is quite a bit of skepticism about regarding U.S. efforts to support democracy and human rights around the world. There are many that say, you know, the U.S. should not get involved into the affairs of another country and impose our values. I'm just and you know, in many cases, I think, as Alfredo says, oftentimes foreign support could be the kiss of death, because you know your organization could be perceived as a foreign agent. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Do you agree with that? And if not, why not?
I think that the role of United States of America of supported democratization in country is negatively evaluated only by regimes who try to conservate the state which is going on. In Ukraine, there is no such attitude to United States of America because we are in process of transformation. And I think that it's a key issue in every kind of support, in every level, for United States of America and for other countries who try to support Ukraine, is to involve a civil society to each level and to transform civil society and regard as an equal partner of this assistance. What it means, during Euromaidan and now in Ukraine create hundreds and hundreds of horizontal volunteers initiatives. They help armies, they help, they treat injured people, they provide food and medicine and settlement for people who left their homes. They try to lobby reforms. They provide documentation of war crimes. So they fulfill the state functions. And sometimes we feel that civil society of Ukraine is much more stronger than than state institutions. That's why we ask in every kind of support to involve civil society. And it can reduce the risk, for example, if it's in context of money, of corruption, and increase the level of effectiveness. And another part of your question is about my opinion and of the role of United States of America. And I must admit that when I hear my colleague, I have a thought that we as human rights defenders will not provide human rights work. We struggle for human rights, and we every day try to liquidate different kinds of fires which appeared. And in this struggle, we saw two main trends. The first is that we observe and we live in time when destruction of post-military order happens. When Russian Federation, a peaceful time, occupied and annexed the part of territory of another countries, only because this territory declare their pro-democratic way of development. And it means that every other countries in post-Soviet Union can be the next victim of such kind of aggression if they choose the democratic way. And it means that all international standards of security is called into doubt. So we live in world which are not safe, and these instruments are not work. And another trends which are very important is a trends that after this disruption of world order, a new discussion of values appeared. And now in a lot of countries in which we work with human rights organizations of which we work together, in societies appeared discussions and the standards of Declaration of Human Rights are into doubt. There are huge trends which promoted by Russian Federation and ideology of traditional values, and they compete with values of human rights. And these trends are global, and they need the global response to solve these trends. And only word which I can use when we look through our daily fires to these happenings in the world general, the world is international solidarity.
Thank you. Alfredo, since you're an attorney, I want to ask you about many countries, such as Iran, Egypt, Russia, are now using their criminal justice system and the veneer of democratic institutions for political persecution. I think we all know that the Iranian-American Washington Post reporter Jason Rezaian was just convicted by an Iranian court for espionage reasons. What do you think about that, and how can we stop that? How can we impact that so that these governments do not use the criminal justice system and the veneer of democratic institutions to persecute, just average, regular people?
Yeah, I'm going to start from the last question. And the answer is, we need, the whole world, I say, to work on rule of law. I believe that in order to get peace, social peace, we need to have justice. And if there is not justice, of course, there is violence. And I always use example of whenever you are in a classroom, high school, whatever, and if one guy steal, say, the phone of the other guy, and then they ask the other guy that was the victim of that, comes to the professor and say, my friends, whoever steal my phone. And the professor doesn't do anything. Then the next day, the same guy comes and steal another thing to another guy, and then. And what happened and the professor doesn't do anything, and then what happened to these people that were the victims? So they join, they get together, and then they start fighting against this guy, but this guy has also friends. And they, these friends are actually start fighting against the victims. And that's how violence is produced, because there is no justice. Because there is no one that actually can be the impartial person or the impartial entity that actually solve the problem. But imagine whenever the judicial system, this guy sitting in a court is not just inefficient. It's more than that. It's that they use the judicial system as a weapon for political persecution. And I know the case of Venezuela, I know the case of another country, we have been studying it, but I'm just going to talk about the case of Venezuela.
So 80%. What can we do about that? What can we do about that?
I think and it's related to international support, I think governments, and I would say the United States and any kind of government, because it's not the United States, it's everyone, should focus on the rule of law and how we can actually use the judicial systems and the way they should be. But it's simple. It's simple because, for example, 80% of judges from the criminal justice system, and the criminal justice system judges in Venezuela are provisional judges. So they're appointed by the government, actually. So they are not judges because a contest or something or whatever, or merits. I mean, the criminal justice system is being actually managed by these people that are not really judges. So actually what happened is that, first of all, they had to be conscious of that situation. Why? Consciousness. Why? Because whenever we talk about a political prisoner, sometimes people around the world think, where they don't understand the situation, that a guy from the executive power, a military guy, will go to your house and take you to jail. No, it's not like that. There is something behind it. There is a judicial system that is actually working as a mask that governments use in order to tell the world, look, this guy, there's a due process of law. There is a judge that actually decided sentence this guy to prison.
Right. So what do we do about that?
Again, I think the work should be focused on rule of law and judicial system. And when I say that, it's not, we are an organization that actually, even though we're against of many human rights abuses made by the government in Venezuela, we try to talk and meet with public officials whenever they want to. We have been, we were part of a human rights plan that is being actually managed by the executive power. When I say that, is that I think there are good people, even in bad governments, there are good people sometimes. These good people want peace, and we in order to work for peace, we need to work with methodologically technically with a restructuring of the judicial system in Venezuela. Guatemala is an interesting case. We have to study the case of Guatemala. Guatemala is an interesting case.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I have a small comment to this issue, because when we speak about what we have to do, we must also speak what we had not to do. And for example, we think that United States of America had not to support the government who turned off democratical choice. The recent example is Russia, because for many years they received a lot of funding, of support, and parallel they provide persecution of Russian civil society. And in these cases, the human rights defenders from Russia and civil society of Russia, they don't understand it. Why? And even regards this behavior as a treason. So if we speak what we have to do, we also have to continue and what we have not to do.
Please go ahead, and then I want to ask you an audience question.
Thank you. I think apart from working on government reforms to have actually institutions that check and balance each other, I think it's also important to give voice to these watchdog institutions, civil society, human rights groups, for example. I think the more we talked about these issues from different angles, the more advocacy is done around this, governments would be more responsive. So even in the context of talking about foreign democracy assistance, I think the government-to-government relationship should also be looking at how civil society could be a critical part of that, because there needs to be watching institutions of this institutionalization of repression, like using the judiciary as it's not just in Venezuela. I think it's becoming a recurring case in many parts of the world. Ethiopia is the same. There have been all sorts of law. There have been all sorts of judicial procedures that have been invoked whenever the government is called in on a treatment of particular groups of dissidents or people that are being dragged to court under the anti-terrorism law. So I think, like I said, it's really important to see the other angle, the other part of the equation. Like there needs to be independent watchers, civil society, media, and citizens groups that actually needs to follow on what these institutions do.
You know, we have a very interesting question from the audience that I'd like all of you to answer. We actually have a couple of other ones too, so if we can make it short, we can get all of them in. Somebody wants to see if each one of you guys can compare and contrast the approaches of the EU and the US in terms of support offered to civil society, and are there lessons to be learned for both Europe and the US from each other? Joseph, do you want to start us out on that?
Sure. I think one of talking with and being part of the human rights community for a long time and still keeping the communications, one of the, I would say, the frustrations colleagues have when we discuss US democracy support is that it is the policy seems to be in the right place, but in terms of its responsiveness, in terms of becoming a solution, part of the solution, it's not been up to at least the standard of what the European Union has been doing. For example, when the Charities and Societies Law was enacted in Ethiopia in 2009, by the way, this law has given to the government needs to be exempted from these funding restrictions that the new law was introducing. So there have not been similar initiatives being undertaken from the side of the US. So that funding that the EU has negotiated with the government of Ethiopia to be exempted from the restrictions of this law has actually been serving as a lifeline for a number of human rights groups, which would otherwise have closed shop a long time ago. So at least this helps to maintain, no matter how limited, the limited space that civil society have to promote democracy and human rights. So I think this could be a lesson for the US to take, like to be creative and to be, I think, quickly responsive in terms of finding creative ways of circumventing these kinds of endless restrictions on free association. So these are the comparisons that I do.
Thank you. Alexandra.
If we speak about lessons learned, I must tell.
Well, compare first, and then lessons learned.
And I will start with lessons learned and then in comparison in each. We can speak about three main lessons. And the first is that situation in our country sometimes changes very rapidly. But our Western partners, EU and US even, they don't revise their approach and their programs so rapidly as the situation need. Second lessons learned is that EU and other countries, democratic countries, sometimes use so-called technocratical approach. What does it mean? It's approach of points. So they see, is this law or this phenomena or this events in state or not? If they see this law, phenomena or events, they press plus. It's technocratical approach. It's not right because authoritarian regime, they use democratic languages to and name the things for democratic worlds, but it's not the same which in other countries. For example, now we have the court hearings after, against our Nadia Savchenko, it's Ukrainian pilot, and you can see the court. It's called a court, but it's not court at all. There is a people who called that I'm a judge, but there is no judge. The decision is taken by heads, and it can be predicted what it will. will be. So this technocratical approach is not good. And third is the main lessons learned for which I saw that there is a temptation not to solve the problem and have a naive hope that in suddenly these problems gone away by themselves. But it's not true. The history proves that if you don't take this challenge and solve the problem have a tendency to be more and more. And now we saw that how problem with democracy in one country start to be a problem for other countries. And it means that if we want to live in safe world, we have to support to spread democracy in different countries. It's only way how to live in safe world with rules and human rights.
Thank you. We really have two final great questions that I want to get in, so let's make this fast. Go ahead.
The same thing?
The same thing, yeah. Compare and contrast and lessons learned.
But when you take compare and contrast, you're talking about public policies of both? Or?
Yeah, policies, actions.
Actually, I've been involved in many conversations and meetings and everything with the European Parliament members and the US and the whole world, and basically, and I see it's always the same problem. I mean, I won't criticize the US. I mean, there are good guys and bad guys here, and good guys and bad guys in the European Parliament or in Europe. But what I want to, because I agree with what they say, you know what is important? That we have to, if we believe in human rights, the whole world, we need to really act as we actually believe in human rights. And what I'm saying, for example, the UN Committee Against Torture issue a resolution against Venezuela saying that, for example, there are political prisoners, there are being people tortured, and the Human Rights Committee of the UN also issue another resolution, and the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights and everyone. Who cares about it? That's the main important thing. I mean, if we create entities to protect human rights, countries should actually care about it, and that's the problem. So you go to the arbitrary group the working group on arbitrary detention. I've been many times there, and they have made a lot of decisions. And then you know what the government of Venezuela thinks about that resolutions? They laugh about it. And you know, there are people from Venezuela here. And you know that. And people maybe from the government here. They laugh about it. Why they laugh about it? Because there is actually countries that support the human rights, the UN entities. What about the rapporteurs? The rapporteurs, I mean, the human rights defender rapporteur, Michel Forst, who I know, because I'm a human rights defender, he went to Venezuela. And not even the ombudsman met with the guy. And the government say it's a joke. The government, because they have this program every Wednesday that they mention me every time. They mention human rights defenders, and they insult me, and they discredited me, and maybe they will show this, and I will say it because it's true, and maybe they will show what I'm saying here today or next week, that I'm, whatever. And they said that this guy, Michel Forst, is like a friend of mine. And they put a picture of Michel Forst and me talking. Yeah, I've talked to him and talked to anyone. And, I don't even know Michel Forst, like, I know him like one day. But the thing is, they laugh of him. So if the world, and that's why international solidarity is important, if the world doesn't even care about the entities that the world creates to protect human rights, the official ones, then the governments don't care. And I will finish with this. Human rights are not for the human rights entities of the UN are not for democratic countries. Are not for democratic countries to say, okay, I agree with that resolution. It's for countries that don't respect human rights. And if countries that don't respect human rights are not really, they don't have any pressure from the international community, not just the human rights community, so the international political community, then the governments, they don't really care about.
So what I'm hearing from both you and Alexandra is you activists have much more of an entrepreneurial mindset where you have to respond to change, you want things done yesterday, whereas you are constantly faced by these bureaucratic hurdles, whether it comes from international organizations or governments that can potentially help you. So hope maybe I can get one more in, but maybe this is our last question. Yusuf, if you met the next president of the United States, what advice would you give him or her, or what request would you put to him or her?
I think basically some of the things I've been talking about, but I actually didn't mention about how consistency in public remarks would mean to activists on the ground. It may be just a symbolic gesture, but if you look at the place where people put the democracy in the US and the values they attach to universal values that the US really adheres to, it really hurts spirits when a senior government official comes out and says, just days after a ruling party secured all the seats in parliament, says there is a democratically elected government in Ethiopia. That sends the message that the whole thing about this commitment to fundamental freedoms and principles of democracy.
Why do you think that happens? Why does that happen?
I think.
I mean, is it for lack of knowledge?
Part of it is just expediency in terms of you are in a country, or just there's the urge to say good things about where you are, like not wanting to be a bad guest, for example. But I think these are serious issues, more serious issues than just that, in terms of when you talk about the implications of this and the long-term damage that it brings to even the credibility and the seriousness of the whole administration, to actually have countries uphold these values would come into question. So I think that consistency in messaging is really important.
Understood. Alexandra, please.
I think that each country has their historical task. And what united all governments, and have to unite all governments in whole world, that they have to respect and defend human rights and create the rule of game in which every person of society feels safe and have perspective and have a future in this country. And we live in a world which everything is very global and connected with each other. And that's why for United States of America is also important to help and to assist and to protect democratic values which they declare. And if each country wants to live in safe, they have care about spread freedoms through our globes. And maybe on this point, I will wish him or her good luck.
Thank you. Please.
The same
we have
question.
2 more minutes left.
Okay, I would say close Guantanamo. I would say do the mea culpa, like Clinton and Lewisi case. If I would talk to the next president, I would say, okay, say that due process of law is important, rule of law is important, even if there are terrorist attack. And if you start with that speech, then you will provide an excellent message to the whole world. But the problem, and I should say, even though I agree with many of the policies of the United States, and I appreciate many things I have done for Venezuelans and for Cubans and for many, you Americans should understand that Guantanamo was a very, very bad mistake for human rights protection, I would say, in the world. Because then they will always use this example of Guantanamo whenever you talk about human rights. So the next president of the United States should do this mea culpa about this situation and provide, I would say, as I said before, this message that if there is no rule of law, there is no peace.
Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank the panel. Really, this was very, very fascinating. Thank you for taking the time to be here.